Michael's spouse. We've known the Rackstraws for quite a few years. We were discussing that earlier, at least 17 years. We got to go to what is it? Yes, we went to Israel, but we also went to the Holocaust Memorial there with the Rackstraws, and it was one of those life-changing moments. One of the coolest parts is when we finished after being emotionally evaporated. We stepped out, and it was actually this light rain that was coming down, and it was beautiful. The Holocaust is a subject that's near and dear to my heart, and so much more to Mr. Rackstraw. He will take over from here, and give him a little applause.
Thank you, Danny. Shabbat Shalom. As we began the run-up to Passover, organising the Seder's and everything, I finished the talk, and I breathed a big sigh of relief, and I thought, all I have to do now is memorise this. But it didn't sit right with me. There was something about it I couldn't put my finger on, and I kept thinking about it, and then all of a sudden, a word came into my head: names. If you were to ask the average person in the street to name a name from the Holocaust, you'd probably hear one name: Hitler. I don't like glorifying that man. So today, I went back and I rewrote this. By the end of this talk, you'll know a few more names of real people. So when we begin the talk about the Holocaust, we start with this date, April 24th, 1915. Now, I'm sure some of you are thinking, wait a minute, this bloke's talking about something that happened in the Second World War. This is the First World War. What's the connection? On April 24th, 1915, the Armenian genocide began. This was where Ottoman Turks began to slaughter Armenian men, women and children, and they killed 1.5 million of them. This is still a red-hot topic today. I've just told you what happened, and I'm going to move on from it. Fast forward now to August 1939. Hitler is within a week or so of invading Poland. He gets all his generals together and begins a long speech. And he tells them that once they get into Poland, they are to be ruthless with the Jews. And then he says, after all, who still talks nowadays about the Armenians? And this is a theme with Hitler. If something happened and there was no reaction to it, he took it as everybody was in agreement with him. And as this talk progresses, you'll see other examples of this. So when we talk about the Holocaust, we're talking about 4 groups of people. Let's talk about people. The first one are the targets. Now, up until a couple of years ago, we used to refer to these people as victims. Unfortunately, that word has started to take on negative connotations. So we use the word target instead. And targets are those that suffered at the hands of the perpetrators. Who are the targets? Well, the Jewish population of Germany was about 0.5% of the population. So we're not talking about a huge section of the population that was a real threat to the people of Germany. But the Nazis were very adept at propaganda and twisting things. I remember once I was listening to a lady speaking. She was the daughter of Holocaust survivors. And she was saying how when she was a little girl, her father would not let her watch Hogan's Heroes on the television. So being a respectful little girl, she didn't say anything. She just went about her business. But later on in life, when she was a grown-up woman, she was in a conversation with her father one day, and she said, "Dad, why wouldn't you let me watch Hogan's Heroes when I was a little girl?" He said, "Love," he said, "that program portrays the Nazis as idiots." He says the Nazis were many things, but idiots wasn't one of them. And that was how it went. The people that we're talking about here are an integral part of German society. And I start with the German Jews because this is where it all begins. I've seen family trees of Jewish families in Germany that go back 500 years. In fact, Hitler was Austrian, he wasn't even German. So we're not talking here about a bunch of people who got off the boat yesterday, are taking everybody's jobs, and people resent them. These are people who are an integral part of society. If you were to ask a Jew in Germany during this period to describe themselves, they would not begin by saying, "I'm a Jew." They'd say, "I'm German. My name is, my wife's name is, my children's names are, I live at, I worship at, I do this, I do that." To them, they were German first. They weren't Jews first, they were Germans first. They lived a very normal life. This is a Jewish children's sports festival in Berlin. The Jewish children, thank you. Perfectly normal. No SS men about, no guards about. Everybody's enjoying themselves. This is a Hanukkah celebration at a school, at the Reichsstrasse school in Berlin in 1935. And just to show how normal all these people are, these are school children. This is a class of Jewish children at a school in Paris. These photographs that I'm about to show you were not taken because these people knew they were going to die in a very short period of time. These photographs were taken for the very same reason that we take photographs. Family get-togethers, children. All the reasons you take photographs was the reason they took photographs. In June of 1943, these children were rounded up and sent to Drancy. Drancy was the collection point in Paris where the Nazis loaded the Jews onto the trains, just like Westerbork in Holland. In June of 1943, these children were shipped to Auschwitz, and only 4 survived. Unfortunately, I don't know which 4 they are. A Jewish family get-together. Perfectly normal. All murdered. Parents with their children, how normal's that? All murdered. Another family gathering. All murdered. And then we look at this. This is a girls' class in Hamburg in the 1930s. Perfectly normal. Young girls try to get an education to get on in life. All murdered. This is a Jewish carpentry workshop in Lithuania. All murdered. The next one is a person that the Nazis considered to be an enemy of the state. A little girl. The Nazis were very keen to murder children because they saw the children as being the next generation of Jews, which they are. So every opportunity the Nazis would murder, they'd murder the children first rather than murder the adults. One of the parts of the Holocaust we never really talk about is Germany's colonial past. At the end of the 19th century, Germany was a colonial power in Africa. And the byproduct of that colonial system was children of a mixed race. And these are children the Nazis despised because they are not the perfect people. We murder those. This is a black survivor at Dachau concentration camp after liberation. So the Nazis really had no scruples about doing what they were doing. This train was travelling from Bergen-Belsen. The people on this train were loaded on it at Bergen-Belsen and they were being shipped east. And the date on this photograph is April the 13th, 1945. So if you know your history, there's 3 weeks more of the war to run in Europe. I don't know where this train was going because there was very little of Germany by this time that wasn't occupied by the Allies or the Russians. These trains ran almost up to the last day of the war. That's how demented the Nazis were at getting rid of these people. And what else happened was, as these trains were going across Europe and the Allies were coming across Europe, if these train drivers felt a bit slightly threatened, then they'd just stop the train and run, leaving everybody locked up in the rail cars. And it wasn't infrequent that the Allies would come across these trains with everybody still locked in the cars and dead. These people were liberated by members of the 743rd Tank Battalion near Farsleben in Germany. Something else we learned as well, during the Spanish Civil War, the Nazis sent troops to fight in Spain, the Condor Legion. They sent Luftwaffe units and army units. For the Nazis, this was a dummy run. They wanted to try all their tactics out that they were going to use when they invaded Poland, and they wanted to test out all their weaponry. And one of the things that they learned was it was far more effective for them to move all their material by train. Luftwaffe units operating in Spain would be going to various airfields. And they began the war there by having to load and unload trucks, move down the road, unload trucks, load, and it was just getting too much. Somebody said, use trains. So they would have these airfields near the railheads, so all that happened, the train ran into the siding, they'd pull out the tools they needed, work on the planes, put it back, move along. So by the time during the war, when the Allies have air superiority over Germany, fighter pilots are flying around looking for targets. And when they saw a train, they went and shot it up because they thought it was war material. Some of them didn't know these trains were full of people. So these people have everything coming at them. They can't get a break at all. Next group of people, the perpetrators. You might think, well, why didn't they just call them Germans? Well, it wasn't all Germans. The German army during the Second World War operated very much like the Roman army 2,000 years ago. When the Romans went into an area and settled down there and got everything going their way, they would start recruiting locally. The German army did the same thing, which is why you have SS battalions composed of Muslims, Ukrainians, Latvians, Poles, Brits. So when we talk about all the atrocities that are committed, please do not lay them at the door of the German people. Yeah, they're culpable, but there's a whole lot more people culpable. So let's briefly just go through what's happening in Germany. This is January 30th, 1933. The man on the right is General Hindenburg. He is the president of Germany. He is a war hero from the First World War. The German people have a lot of respect for him. The man he's shaking hands with, he doesn't like. He considers him to be a bit of an upstart, Johnny-come-lately sort of thing. He has no political experience, but he really can't do anything because Hitler has, technically speaking, been elected. I'm not going to talk about that because it's a really convoluted, there was a lot of wheeler-dealing went on, and Hitler would convince the German people if they elected him, he'd work against the communists, which the German people really feared. So you see, the enemy of my enemy is my friend does not always work. After this date, Hindenburg's health begins a slow decline. So he thinks, I'll go to my estate in Prussia, I'll have some R&R, get my health back, then I can go back to Berlin and carry on being president. It don't quite work like that. He goes to Prussia, but his health continues declining. And Hitler hears about this. So Hitler, being the consummate politician, decides he's going to go and visit Hindenburg, and he's going to take all the journalists he can with him. So he goes to Prussia, gets his photograph taken by the side of Hindenburg's bed, paying homage to this great German hero. Hitler then goes back to Berlin. He then proceeds to give a speech to the Reichstag. Now, during the National Socialist period, the Reichstag did not meet in the Reichstag building in Berlin, which you might be thinking they didn't. Hitler never went into that building. During the National Socialist period, the Reichstag met in the Opera House in Potsdam. So Hitler goes in front of the Reichstag and he gives this long, rambling speech about how he was really blessed to be able to go and visit our long hero of Germany that the people adore, whose name is not fit to pass my lips, and everything like that. Then at the end of it comes a crunch. He says, you know, we have a very complicated system of government here. We have a president and a chancellor and the Reichstag. Why don't we just combine the two top offices and it'll make governing a lot easier? So the Reichstag, yeah, that'll work for us, yeah, you're it. And this is when Hitler becomes the Reichsführer. And this is 1934 by now. They're already building concentration camps. And always remember that in Europe, the war starts September 3rd, 1939, not 1941. These are the camps. The first camp that gets completed is Dachau. Dachau was used for the Nazis to basically get rid of anybody they wanted. If they didn't like your face, you went to Dachau. Now, they did have gas chambers and crematoria there, but nothing like what was coming down the road. The gas chamber at Dachau is probably half the size of this little area here, but they still had the capability to do it, and they still murdered people. And Dachau also served as the pilot for everything that was coming down the road. Dachau is in a suburb of Berlin. You know, you might think that all the nasty stuff that the Nazis did was done in the middle of some dark forest in the middle of the night, when no. They had two camps in Berlin, Sachsenhausen and Dachau. So they weren't really concerned about what people knew about it. You have Flossenburg, Buchenwald, Sachsenhausen, Mauthausen and Ravensbrück. Ravensbrück was the women's prison. Mauthausen was unique. It was in Austria. And Mauthausen was built around a quarry. Going down into this quarry was a flight of steps. There was something like 400 or 500 steps, and they were very wide. You could get 5, 6, 7 men side by side on a step. And what they used to do at Mauthausen, fall all the prisoners in, march them all down the steps. They all picked up large boulders, and they had to take them to the top. Anybody dropped a boulder, they stumbled, they either shoot them or just push them off the steps so they fall down into the quarry. That was Mauthausen. And the other characters in this, we have Himmler. He was in charge of building the camps. He used to be a chicken farmer, but he was a devoted Nazi. He was with Hitler going way back to the beginning of the socialist period. Heydrich, this was the beast of Bohemia. What the Nazis tended to do when they went into Eastern Europe, they used to start resurrecting the historical names of these areas. So Czechoslovakia became Bohemia. He was assassinated by 2 Czech partisans who were trained in England and parachuted in to kill him. Eichmann, the head of the Final Solution. Now, one of the things you have to bear in mind while you look at this man and you think he is totally responsible for the Holocaust. No, he's not. This man had a staff of 90 people. Some of them were officers. You can bet a load of them were administrative people. And you'll see later on some of the things that went on could not possibly have been done by this man and his people. This may surprise you. We're talking about the Holocaust. And here we have an Arab. This is Mohammed Ayman al-Husseini. He's the mayor of Jerusalem. During the Second World War, he was the mayor of Jerusalem. He hated Jews with a passion. He spent most of the war in Berlin talking to Hitler, Himmler, anybody that would listen to him, telling them what he wanted out of the Nazis when they got into the Middle East, and we'll see what his handiwork achieved a little bit down the road. 1935, we have the Nuremberg Laws. These were another step in the degradation of the Jews. There were a couple of things that happened earlier, the Reichstag fire laws, the Enabling Act. With the Nuremberg laws, you have the law for the protection of German blood and German honor and the Reich citizenship law. The first thing that these laws did was to classify Jews as an ethnic group. You'd have to explain that one to me. And the other thing it did was strip Jews of their citizenship. And then there were a whole slew of laws against the Jews. Jews could not fly the state flag. Jews could not go to German schools. Jewish doctors could not treat Gentiles. They could only treat Jews. Gentiles could not go out with Jewish women. Jewish women could not go out with Gentiles. You name it. Jews can live here. These are the jobs that Jews can do. Jews can't play in symphony orchestras. And if you want to get to the realm of stupidity, if a Jewish farmer had a cow and he wanted to breed from it, he had to take it to a Jewish farmer who had a bull. But that's the way it was. If you were to go into a government building in Germany during this time, somewhere on the wall, you'll find a flow chart. And this flow chart would begin with the question, were any of your maternal grandparents Jewish? Were any of your paternal grandparents Jewish? And it just went all down, asking all these relations are Jewish. And at the end of it, it would tell you how much of a Jew you were. You could be a quarter Jew, a half Jew, or a whole Jew. And it would also tell you the ultimate insult to the Nazis is a Mischlinger, someone of mixed race. That would be me. I have Norwegian, Danish, French, German, and Italian blood. And Hitler, if he wanted to insult Churchill, he'd call the English a race of mongrels. And Churchill had fired back and says, well, thoroughbreds are always highly strung and take a great deal of medical attention. And that was the Nuremberg laws. And one of the ironies is, this hatred that the Nazis had for Jews was on a convenience scale, because the deputy head of the Luftwaffe was a man by the name of Milker. And he was Jewish. And the Nazis knew it. But he was doing such a good job, they didn't want to have to get rid of him. So they would tolerate Jews to a certain extent. In the fullness of time, this business of being a quarter, half, or whole Jew just went by the board. If you had the slightest bit of Jewish blood in you, that was it. They didn't want to know. These are German children of the time. They're reading a book called The Poison Mushroom. This is an anti-Semitic book. Now, the Nazis were very careful. I told you what they did to Jewish children. Their own children, they were really protective of, because these were the next generation of Nazis. Boys had the Hitler Youth. Girls had the League of German Daughters. There were more members in the Hitler Youth. There were 8 million members in the Hitler Youth, and there were probably about 4 million in the Nazi Party. So we're talking about big numbers here. The Nazis had obviously heard of Lenin's quote, if you give me your children for 4 years, I'll put ideas in their heads that will stay with them all their lives. And that's the way the Nazis worked. They got the children early enough. By the time these kids were 9, 10, 11, they were just Nazi war machines. And I often think as the war was running down, these children were given weapons because the Reich was running out of troops. And I think about the Allied soldier who's walking down the street with his rifle. A 10-year-old kid jumps out with a machine gun. Everything inside that soldier's head is saying, we do not shoot children, we do not shoot children. But a bullet will kill you regardless of how old the finger is on the trigger. That's something perhaps we never think about. This is the portrayal of the Jew by the Nazis, and this is the sort of stereotypical Jew. You see the facial features, the nose, the eyes, the hands almost claw-like. He's holding a bag of money in one hand and the other hand's about to scoop the money off the table, and he's standing in front of his open money box. One of the myths that the Nazis promulgated, the German people had a very bad taste in their mouth for the fact that Germany had to surrender in the First World War. The Nazis played into this because they said this was the fault of the Jews. The Jews controlled the banks. They denied the German government access to money to continue fighting the war, so we had to surrender. So you can blame the Jews for that. And remember, this is an age where if somebody tells you something, you either believe them or you don't believe them. There was no internet, no Facebook, nothing. And the Nazis were very clever with that. This is an exhibition in 1938 Vienna. It's called The Eternal Jew. And there on the end of the museum wall is this huge portrayal of a Jew. Once again, the facial features, the bag of money under the arm, the outstretched hand, gimme, gimme, gimme. And this was something that people had day in, day out. This wasn't a fleeting thing. Nazis were very good with the newspapers. They controlled most of them. This photograph is taken in the city of Worms, 1934, five years before the war starts. And you see that at the very top, mit dem Stürmer gegen Jude. That means with the name of the newspaper is the Stürmer, which means the attack against the Jews. And look at what they're looking at. On the left, you may not be able to make it out, but on the left-hand side of the board is another caricature of the Jew. It's there again. That's what you're going to see. And then across the top of the board there, we have the words, Die Juden sind unser Unglück, which roughly translated means the Jews are the cause of all our problems. Now, when I said that, I would imagine you thought that's ridiculous. But remember, every day, day in, day out, month in, month out, year in, year out, you're going to read that. And then sometime life doesn't go too well for us. You know, perhaps we have medical issues, money problems, somebody loses the job, you lose your house, all those sort of things. And as you think about it one day, that little voice at the back of your head starts saying, the Jews are the cause of all your problems. And people in desperate situations will believe desperate things. That newspaper, Der Stürmer, was run by a man who was tried for war crimes at the end of the war, and he was executed. His name escapes me. If you were driving around Germany during this period and you were coming up to towns and villages, these are the sort of signs you would see at the entrance to these places. Basically, this says the people here don't want any Jews in their midst, just keep going. And it will be signs of that ilk. You know, Jews not welcome, Jews keep going, Jews stay away. It was just one thing after another. Book burning, something we're all familiar with, I would imagine. This is 1933 in Berlin, 6 years before the war started. I'm sure you can guess some of the sort of books that the Nazis might want to burn. How about books by Helen Keller? They burned Helen Keller's books. Why? Well, let's think about it. As far as I know, Helen Keller was born in Alabama. She wasn't a Jew. She wasn't a politician. She was never in Germany. Helen Keller was born with several challenges which she was able to overcome. And she helped other people in similar situations. She wrote books. She established homes for them where these people could live productive lives. The Nazis did not want that. They wanted you to be in debt to the state. They did not want people thinking for themselves, doing for themselves, improving their own lives. You had to be thankful to the state for everything. And as a German poet once said, where you burn books, soon you're burning bodies. And then we have the illustrious blood libel. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this. The blood libel states that Christians murder Jewish babies, drain their blood to make matzah at Passover. Well, if you know anything about the blood laws, that's impossible. And it's also ridiculous. Unfortunately, even in this day and age, there are people who believe that. So here's a little boy. This photograph was taken in Frankfurt am Main in 1932, and the young boy's name is Herbert Cohn. It's his first day at school, and he's holding a large cone in his hand, and I love asking the kids when they come round the Bremen, what do you think's in that cone? And you'd be amazed at the answers. It's full of sweets, and this was symbology. Education is sweet, enjoy it. The dentists and the parents must have loved that. But I want to talk about Herbert's experience. He would go to school. The routine was in the morning, Herbert would go down to the bottom of the yard and stand at the gate while his friends who'd started off further out walked by, and he'd meet up with them and they'd all walk to school. Big group of friends, all got on like a house on fire. Then one day, Herbert's in the classroom. It's the beginning of the day. He's getting all his books ready for the coming school day. The teacher comes in the classroom and says, "Right, children, who of you are Jews?" So Herbert puts, I'm a Jew, and a couple of other kids. And the teacher says, "Well, you can't go to German school. Pack your bags and go home." What? So little Herbert here has to walk back now that we're talking here about a large city, stacks of traffic, wide boulevards. This kid's just had the shock of his life, and he's having to walk home. While this is going on, the next door neighbour to Herbert's house has come round to talk to Herbert's mother. And she tells Mrs. Cohn, she says, "Look, the government's told me I can have nothing to do with you now because you're Jews. So please don't bother us, don't talk to us, don't acknowledge us. You just get on with your own lives." Herbert comes home, tells his mum what had happened, and I would imagine there were a few tears shed round the kitchen table. The next morning, Herbert's not going to school, but he decides he's going to go down to the gate just to wave at his friends as they go by. Now remember, the day before, these kids were the best of friends. And he sees his friends coming down the road, and he's, "Hi guys, good to see you," blah, blah. Then the kids point at Herbert and they say, "Look, there's a dirty Jew." This was in the space of one day. This is what the government was doing. These kids had been turned. This is Herbert Cohn's father. You may notice he's wearing a uniform. That is a German army uniform. Yes, as many as 400,000 German Jews fought for Germany in the First World War. So if that's not a kick in the teeth, I don't know what is. 1938, once again Europe has a refugee problem. Does that sound familiar? So they did what all governments do when they're faced with a problem, they have a meeting. Yes. This is Evian Spa in France. If you like Evian water, this is where it comes from. And they were going to discuss what Europe's going to do with all these refugees. Countries sent delegations. One country wasn't invited. Yes, you're right, it was Germany. But Germany did send a delegation just the same. This conference was really doomed from the beginning because the representatives were so far down the totem pole they couldn't even decide whether to have scrambled or boiled eggs for breakfast, never mind solve these sort of problems. But the governments were playing the game, we'll send people. When the conference started, the majority of the attendees were away enjoying the facilities of the spa, tennis, swimming, bowls, whatever they do in spas. So really it was a bit of a joke. However, the German delegation went to every meeting. They went to every meeting and they made detailed reports of what was said and who was saying it. By the end of the meeting, one country had agreed to accept Jewish refugees. I won't ask you to guess because we'll probably be here for the rest of the month. Dominican Republic. Why the Dominican Republic? Well, they had an ulterior motive. They were just starting a dairy industry and they thought if they could get Jews in with their business acumen, they'd be off to a flying start. But there was a proviso. They had to be paid $1,000 for every Jew they took in. Well, the conference finished. All the delegations went back to their respective countries. German delegation goes back to Berlin, types up their report, gives it to Hitler. Hitler reads it and he says, you see, they really don't care what happens to the Jews. Once again, this inactivity, Hitler assumes it's condescension. And it's at this point Hitler knows now he can go ahead with what he intends to do. November 9th, 1938, Kristallnacht. I'm sure you're familiar with it, the night of broken glass. Now, if you listen to the Nazi propaganda, Kristallnacht was a spontaneous uprising by the German people against the Jews, which it wasn't, of course. Today is what we would call state-sponsored terrorism. The Nazis were very good at winding people up. Now, you remember the little boy I talked about earlier, Herbert? Well, he lived through Kristallnacht, and I remember him telling me how he heard the fire engines going by at night, all the bells and whistles going, and like any young boy who was intrigued, he was looking out the window and he wanted to know what was going on. So he persuades his brother to go with him. So they're walking down the streets, they can see the glare of the fire, so they know roughly where they're aiming for. He turns onto the street and he suddenly realizes it's their synagogue that's on fire. And there's a big crowd in the street. So two little boys, they push their way through all the legs and get to the front. They notice that the police and the firemen are standing in the middle of the street. And there are a lot of people running in and out of the synagogue. They go in, bring something out. And Herbert's thinking, oh, they're saving stuff. Then he realizes they're piling it up in the street. Then they set fire to it. And as he watches this scene unfold, he realizes that the fire brigade is there to make sure the German-owned property either side doesn't get damaged, and the policeman's there to make sure nobody interferes with the people who are looting the synagogue. Well, by this time, Herbert realizes this really isn't the sort of place two young Jewish boys should be standing. So they very carefully start to back out. And when you listen to Herbert tells a story, he tells you that was the night he invented the moonwalk. So they get home. One of the other things that happened on Kristallnacht, we begin to see mass roundups. Men are just rounded up and taken away. They were going to concentration camps. Usually Buchenwald was the one that went there. They're taken into protective custody. This is Herbert's grandfather. He's wearing the uniform of an officer in the German army. And he fought in the First World War. On Kristallnacht, the mob came in, grabbed him and just took him away. Never told his family where he was being taken, why he was being taken, or what was going to happen to him. Weeks went by and they heard and they feared the worst. They thought he's dead. One night, about 6 weeks later, there's a knock on the door. They answer the door, and there's this figure standing there. He has a shock of white hair. He's gaunt. He's wearing a torn and tattered raincoat, and he's barefoot in snow. And then there's a bit of a conversation starts, and they realise it's Herbert's grandfather. He'd lost 60 pounds in 6 weeks. And they told him what happened to him. They were taken to a camp. When they got to the camp, they were all lined up outside and told to strip. And as they were undressing, the guards were going through all their clothes, checking the pockets, money, watches, anything of value, they were taking it. Well, in the initial stages of the National Socialist period, Jews who fought for Germany were given a certificate. And this was basically a get out of jail free card. What it said, and I'm paraphrasing, the bearer of this certificate fought for the fatherland in the Great War. Don't touch him, basically. Well, as the guard was going through the grandfather's overcoat, he found this certificate in its pocket. He read it, he threw the coat, he said, "You can go." Now, later on in the war, this certificate meant absolutely nothing, but for right now, Herbert's grandfather gets away with it. And he actually survived. It's very fortunate. SS St. Louis. Now we begin to start seeing how other countries figure into this picture. This ship belongs to the Hamburg America line, and she sails the Atlantic run. In May 13th, 1939, she sails from Hamburg. On board are 847 Jewish refugees. Now that may surprise you, but getting out of Germany was relatively simple. The hard part was getting in somewhere else. Now I would imagine as this ship slipped her berth at Hamburg docks and started heading for the open sea, I would imagine there were 847 sighs of relief and things like, we did it, we got away. They had all the paperwork, everything they had was legit. They had visas, they had exit certificates, everything, you name it, they had it. They were all legal and above board, and they were going to Cuba. This was Cuba before the revolution, obviously. Well, the ship gets halfway across the Atlantic and there's a signal arrives on board from the Cuban government. We understand you have Jews on board. Do not land any Jews here. If they have any paperwork, burn it. It means nothing. Do not let them off your ship. Now, at this point, I've read 2 stories of the same event, and they're both different. One story says the ship does not go to Havana. The other story says the ship had to go to Savannah because she was carrying 2 Nazi agents who were going to operate in Cuba during the war. They were going to spy on that part of the world. Florida, perchance. But anyway. So he's going round in circles for a couple of days trying to figure out what to do. And as I'm sure you know, on board a ship, you only have so much fuel and you only have so much food. So he knows he's got to have to make a decision pretty soon about what he's going to do. So he starts to head for Baltimore. He starts chugging up the eastern seaboard here. Now, America has just passed very strict immigration laws. We're also not long out of the Depression. Jobs are not particularly available, and people do not want immigrants coming in taking their jobs. The American Army, the US Army, positions units on the beaches all the way up the eastern seaboard to make sure nobody jumps off this ship and swims ashore. The captain's told you can't go into Baltimore. So by now, things are getting really serious, and he decides the only thing I can do is go back to Hamburg, the very place they started from. So roughly 5 weeks after she left, this ship goes back into Hamburg. And of the 847 Jews on board, round about 250 were able to get to Sweden, which technically was neutral in the last war. A couple of hundred managed to get to England, where they survived the war, and the remainder went to the death camps. That is known as the St. Louis Incident. Einsatzgruppen. In June of 1941, Hitler begins the invasion of Russia. That word, roughly translated, means action group. And the way it works was the German army was going to go into Russia and just keep going east. Behind them came these people. There were 5 units, A, B, C, D, E. The first 4 went into Russia. Now you remember the Arab gentleman who spent a lot of time in Berlin? He persuaded the Nazis to send an Einsatzgruppen unit to the Middle East to get the Jews there. So it was sent to Greece just to wait, because the plan was von Paulus would swing down south to go through the Caucasus so the Germans could get the oil down there and keep going. Rommel would come across North Africa with the Afrika Korps and get into the Middle East, and at that point the Einsatzgruppen unit would leave Greece and go into the Middle East. However, Rommel met the British Army at El Alamein, where he got turned back, and I'm proud to say my father fought in that battle. So that Einsatzgruppen unit never got into the Middle East. This, you know, when you study the Holocaust, a lot of the bad things really happened in Ukraine, as if they didn't have enough. This is near Novgorod in the Ukraine. The man with the rifle is a member of the Einsatzgruppen. The woman has a young child in her arms, and she's turned her back to the soldier to protect the child. He shoots the gun, the bullet goes through the mother, it goes through the child and kills them both. How did we get this photograph? When the German army went into Russia, all the correspondence that was going back to Berlin went through the mail system, went through the postal system. It went through Poland. And the Polish underground was very with it, because they had their agents working in the post offices. So when they found a letter that looked quite interesting, it might mention army units, numbers, tactics, casualties, anything that would lend a better vision of what's going on in the war. So they'd take it and they'd send it back to London, where the Polish government in exile was. This was in a letter that a German soldier on the Eastern Front was sending home to his parents. Now, this is the mindset of the people we're dealing with here. He is very proud of this soldier, because this soldier has killed 2 Jews with 1 bullet. He has saved the Führer a bullet which will enable them to kill another Jew. And that's the mindset of the people that we're dealing with here. One of the favourite tricks of the Einsatzgruppen, they would go into a town or a village and round up the Jews, and then they would herd them into a wooden structure, a barn or something, lock the doors and set fire to it, because that way they saved ammunition. As far as the Jews were concerned, the Nazis were doing on a cost-benefit analysis. If you read some of the documentation, you think they're talking about moving parcels around, not people. There were a lot of problems with this for the Nazis. It wasn't very efficient. It took a lot of manpower. It took a lot of resources, ammunition, and it was very demoralizing. You imagine when you get up in the morning, you think, well, all I'm going to do is today shoot innocent men, women, and children. Don't sound like a really good day, does it? No. So what the Nazis did was they used to ship these units as much alcohol as they needed, hard liquor. And these people were just stoned out the brains for most of the war. They hadn't a clue. I have seen a photograph of an Einsatzgruppen soldier with a gun to a man's head he's about to kill, and he's smiling. That's who these people are. One of the things about this correspondence that the Nazis were sending back, they were fastidious record keepers, and that's after the war. That's what got them, because the Allies found all this information and the trials were a no-brainer. They had all the evidence they wanted. So when a commander in one of these units wrote back what they'd done for the day. There was no rounding up or rounding. It wasn't, well, we got roughly 10,000 today, or perhaps a shade less than 9,000. There would be precise number. We got 9,751 today. We have intercepted telegrams where you can see all the totals for what these people are doing in a day's work. This. Do you remember a few weeks ago when the Russian invasion of Ukraine started, there was a report that a Holocaust site had been bombed? This is it. This is Babi Yar near Kiev. Now, I don't want to get into a top 10 of the world's worst atrocities, but this was where the Nazis did one of the worst. In 2 days, they murdered 34,000 people. The thing about Babi Yar, its natural features are ravines and gullies. So all they had to do was shoot people at the top and push the bodies down into the bottom. So they did that and they went about the business fighting the war. When it became obvious that they were not going to win, they went back and dug all the bodies up, and we don't know what they did with them. We suspect they burnt them. And as we would say today, they sanitized the site. Now, this photograph is just before the Nazi atrocity. It looks rather idyllic, doesn't it? There's two ladies on the left there. One's got a little child in her arms talking to the German soldier who's not even wearing his tin helmet. It's a nice idea. The people down in the ravine are Russian prisoners of war. Interesting thing about the Russians, if you asked a Russian to talk about the Holocaust, they would tell you the Holocaust is all about what the Nazis did to the Russian people. Nothing about Jews whatsoever. That's the Russian version of the Holocaust. And if you drive around Europe, you'll start seeing these. There are graves throughout Europe. You know, you can't say, well, all the bodies are around these camps that we know of. No, wherever the Nazis stopped and murdered people, we find these graves. Mass graves, another set of graves. These are all throughout Europe. All in all, the Einsatzgruppe have murdered 1.5 million people. And like I say, it wasn't very effective. And the Nazis were trying to come up with a better routine. And this is where they did it. This is Vancy Mansion. Vancy Mansion is a suburb, it's in an affluent neighbourhood. This is a mansion that belonged at the time to a German merchant. And the houses either side are just as grand as this one. It's not difficult to get to. Joe and I took a short train ride down from Berlin, got a tram, and we were there. So the Nazis weren't really concerned about who knew what was going on. This is where we get the phrase, the final solution, because it was the final solution to the Jewish question. Now, this meeting, ostensibly, was going to figure out how the Nazis were going to eradicate world Jewry, because they're still thinking globally. But for right now, they've got to tackle the Jews in Europe. Now, you might think that a meeting such as this that was going to decide the lives of millions of people would have all the heavy hitters there. No, they weren't. Hitler wasn't there. Himmler, Heydrich, Eichmann, and there were 10 officers. And about 8 of them were doctors. And this is where they come up with the death camps. These are the death camps. Auschwitz-Birkenau, Belzec, Chelmno, Majdanek, Sobibor, and Treblinka. They're all in Poland. The sole function of these plants was to kill people. There was no question about being sent there for slave labour. If you went there, you were dead. Usually within about an hour of the train stopping there. I'm very specific about when I say Auschwitz-Birkenau. Normally people will refer to Auschwitz as Auschwitz and leave it at that. But there were 3 camps at Auschwitz. Auschwitz I, Auschwitz-Birkenau and Auschwitz-Monowitz. Monowitz was a slave labour camp. They supplied slave labour to the AG Farben plant about 2 kilometres down the road. Auschwitz I was a very long established prison camp. This is the part of the camp with the brick buildings. It has an air of permanency about it. And this used to be a camp for political prisoners going way back. This was in existence even before the First World War. Birkenau was the one with the crematoria and the gas chambers. And this is the entrance to Auschwitz I, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. It has the cynical Arbeit macht frei above the gate, work will set you free. Something I never recognized or realized about this particular sign, if you look at the letter B in the word Arbeit, it's upside down. And I often wonder whoever put this sign together was trying to show there's something wrong here. And this is one of those iconic photographs from the Second World War. This is the watchtower at Birkenau. Every train that went into Birkenau went through down those tracks and through that gate. The other side of the gate was an area known as the ramp, and this was where the trains were unloaded and things really started to happen. Something we have to be aware of is that Auschwitz is its German name. Before the Second World War, the place we call Auschwitz was actually in Germany. But as part of the reparations for the Germans starting World War I, Poland gained territory and Poland moved westwards. So the place we call Auschwitz is now in Poland. If you look at a map of Poland, you will not see Auschwitz on it. You'll see that. It's pronounced Oświęcim. Now we look at the business of Auschwitz. This is the ramp. This is where the trains are unloaded. If we look up into the top left, we see the watchtower, so we know it's Birkenau. These trains will pull in. Now, these trains quite often could have been on the journey for five days or so. Remember, you have trains running from Greece, Holland, France, all over the place. So when they opened these rail cars up, as many as 1/5 of the people that got into them were already dead. If you look at the bottom left, you see prisoners wearing the striped uniforms, or as some people call them, the striped pajamas. These are the Sonderkommandos. These are Jewish prisoners. One of their main functions is to work around the gas chambers. Their job was to remove the bodies from the gas chamber and load them into the crematoria. The Nazis were very leery of these people because the one thing they dreaded was any of the Allies getting their hands on one of these people, because they knew exactly what was going on in the camp. They could name names, give them numbers, when they happened and how they did it. So about every 6 months, the Nazis would murder all the Sonderkommandos and start with a fresh batch. These trains would pull in and nothing happened. The doors weren't opened until the SS officer shouted, "Raus, raus," and the doors would fly open. The Sonderkommandos would help people out of the train cars. Now, when these people were rounded up, they were allowed to take a piece of luggage with them, a case. I think it was like 50 kilograms or something. And if you didn't have a case, they'd use a sheet, put it in the centre and tie the corners up. Well, when they come out of the rail cars, the Germans and the Sonderkommandos would tell them, if you put your luggage, just leave your luggage here, you're going to go for a shower and freshen up, and then you'll be taken to your barracks. And in the meantime, we'll make sure your luggage gets to your room so that when you're freshened up, you have your luggage. Unfortunately, they believed that. I mean, who gets off a train and goes in a gas chamber? And that's what happened. You see the woman in the lower right walking across with the young baby. She's going to the gas chamber. The Germans did not want it. They would not accept anybody under the age of 13. or over the age of 30. And if you had any physical or mental issues, you were going to the gas chamber as well. They were not going to feed and clothe somebody who couldn't work. And once they were off the train, then we begin to see the selection. Women and children in one row, men in another. And when these people were coming off the rail cars, if the Zona commandos could, if there was a youngish child, they'd say, tell him you're 13. If they ask your age, tell him you're 13. And that's what they were trying to do. And there you see at the front, you can see the SS officers sorting it all up. Now, the people who were doing the selection were not necessarily doctors. I guess it was a case of if they liked your face and you were of the right age and everything, you go for slave labour. If not, you go to the gas chamber. Now, don't fall into the trap of thinking if you went for slave labour, you got the good deal. No, you didn't. The diet at Auschwitz was designed to keep a prisoner alive for 6 weeks. So your choices were you die slowly in 6 weeks or you die relatively quickly in the gas chamber. So that's what's happening here. This is a better shot of how the Nazis lined everybody up and went for the selection process. Here it is again. Now, if you look on the skyline, to the left of the train and to the right, you'll see what look like chimneys. Those are the gas chambers. Well, they're actually the crematoria. The gas chambers are right next door. That's how close they were. These people come off this train, cross the railroad track, walk up that track on the far side, and they're there. That's it. Remember I said that people left their effects that they brought with them on the ramp while they went for a shower? Well, you can see the piles of their effects left there. So what happened to them? There was an area of Auschwitz that the Nazis called Canada. They called it Canada because they felt that Canada was a land of opportunity. I mean, the way these people's mind works is quite amazing. So all these people's effects would be taken to Canada, and there were prisoners in there who would sort through it. This stuff was going to Germany. The Nazis were giving it to the German civilians. Thank you for putting up with the deprivations you're having to put up with because of them pesky allies bombing your homes. And I often wonder, a German household receives a suitcase with stuff in it, and on the outside is the name Lowenstein. Do they ever wonder who Lowenstein was? Think about it. This is the grove. These people are waiting to die. They don't know it. They think they're going for a shower. If you look at this photograph without knowing what's going on, it looks perfectly normal. You see the boys in the left-hand corner there, just like boys all over the world looking at the cameraman. I don't know if you can see it, but in the lower right, there's a little girl standing, one sitting on the floor, and it looks like a young lady there. Well, that has actually got a crayon mark round it. And I often wonder if somebody looked at this photograph and recognized those people. The grove, those trees are birch trees. And that's how Birkenau gets its name, because of the birch trees. And these people are waiting to go to the gas chamber. This is the Hungarian women's camp. This is a bit difficult to point out, but if you look at the lower right-hand side, there's a woman wearing a white dress. You got that? Come left, 4 people. 1, 2, 3, 4. She's the second from the end. And just file that in your ready-use memory for a moment, and we'll come back to that. But this is the section in Auschwitz known as the Hungarian Women's Barracks. So I've shown you these photographs. Now let's talk about the photographs themselves. We know a lot about these photographs. We know the names of the people who may have taken them. At this time, there were 2 German army photographers working in Birkenau, so it was one or the other of them that took these photographs. We know where this train came from. It came from Hungary. On this train were Jews from the town of Bilka, and one of them was a young girl by the name of Lily Yakov, or Lily Jacob, and she'd been put on that train with a family. She came off the train, they went through selection, she's being led away in one line, and she looks round and sees her family going the other way. They're going to the gas chamber, but she doesn't know that. And she's thinking to herself, I want to be with my family. I'm in a strange place, there's a lot of stuff going on, I need to be with my family. So she jumps out the line and tries to get over there. And there's an SS officer right by her. They get into a fight, and she actually gets stabbed, but she survives, and they take her away, and she does her slave labour. Now let's fast forward to the end of 1944. The Russians are getting very close. It was the Russians that liberated Auschwitz. Now it was the German practice that when the Allies were closing in on these camps, all these camps, not just Auschwitz, rather than just shoot everybody because ammunition was in short supply, they'd throw the gates open and they'd send the prisoners on what they called a death march. And these prisoners were just made to walk. They basically just walked until they dropped dead. So come this particular day when the gates of Auschwitz are thrown out, Lily joins the other prisoners and they set off on a death march. They walk 400 miles, they go west, and they end up in a place called Camp Dora. Camp Dora had just been liberated, and Lily is extremely ill. She weighs about 70 or 80 pounds. She's got so much going wrong with her. They don't know. I mean, her friends that are with her, they're not doctors, they have no medical training, and they certainly have no medicine. So they decide probably the nicest thing they can do for Lily is to find her a bed that she can die in. She can die warm and comfortable, which they do. The SS barracks had just been vacated and they found this bedroom. Now remember this, they are 400 miles west of Auschwitz. They could have gone anywhere in Germany. They've got to this camp, and in this camp are probably several hundred bedrooms or cabins. And she's put in this one particular room. They put her into bed, took her in, and they say, that's all we can do. You're in God's hands now. And they expect her to just pass away peacefully. Well, a bit later on, Lily wakes up and she's cold. There's a chest of drawers in this room, so she thinks, I wonder if there's a blanket in there. So she opens the drawer up, and there is a photograph album. And she opens it up, and the first photograph that she sees is of her rabbi, Naftali Tzvi Weiss, from Bilka. And as she turns the page, she sees her family as they're being led off to the gas chamber. And as she turns the page again, you remember the women I said to check her? That's her. She sees a photograph of herself. Now remember, they could have gone anywhere in Germany, and in that camp they could have gone in any room, but they went in that one room that had that photograph album in it. We don't know why those photographs were taken. As you can imagine, the Nazis weren't particularly keen to publicise what was going on in these camps. We suspect it was put together to give as a going away present to some senior Nazi officer. That's about the weirdest thing you could think of. We think that's what have happened. Lily survived the war, and she hung on to this photograph album because this was the only thing she had of her family. And in 1980, That's Lily there. She gave the book to Yad Vashem. If you go around Yad Vashem, you come to a point, this is indoors, there's a rail car, not the one that's outside by the arch going into eternity. There's a rail car in there, and right by it is a very small plinth with this album on it. There are tons more photographs in it. And when we went round Yad Vashem, I walked past it, and I didn't see it till I was way down the room, and I thought, what's that? And then I realised what it was. So it's known today as the Jacob album. If you Google Jacob album, you'll see all these photographs and a few more. This is what they did in Hungary. They moved 437,402 people on 147 trains in 54 days. Now remember at the beginning I was talking about Ankman being head of the final solution. No way does 90 people do that. Now when the Germans went into Hungary, the Hungarian government was all, hey, leave the Jews to us. You don't have a thing to worry about. You go and fight your war, we'll take care of the Jews. And this happened in country after country after country. These governments were only too keen to get rid of the Jews. So Eichmann didn't really have a whole lot to do with that. Now we come to another group of people, and these are the people who you rarely hear talked about. And these are the people whose names I want to leave you with. Rescuers and resistors, those who fought against the perpetrators. This man, he's Polish, his name just went right on my head, Witold Pilecki. He's wearing the uniform of an officer in the Polish army. After the German invasion, the Polish army was decimated. Many of them joined the resistance and carried on the war from there. Well, in 1943, they begin to get reports of what's going on at a place called Auschwitz. So the underground people start listening, and they think, there might be something in this. So they document it, and then they send it to London, where the Polish government was. What they did during the war in Europe, when it looked like the Nazis were moving in, the government would move lock, stock and barrel to London, because the Allies knew that when they win the war, they're not going to have time to have elections and all that sort of stuff. There had to be a government ready to hit the ground running on day one of liberation. So all the European governments were in London. So they send this, the underground sends this letter to London. There's a peculiar smell. There's trains full of people going in, but you never see anybody coming out. And you look at night and there's flames coming out of chimneys. And they thought they were doing a really good job. And the response they got knocked them back a bit, because they said, I'm sorry, we don't see this. Because nobody thought of these killing factories. You don't put 8,000 people a day in a gas chamber, and they just couldn't get it. They said, you're mistaken. We're not disagreeing with what you're seeing. You're just putting the wrong take on it. So these people thought, no, we're onto something, and we're going to make this right. So Witold actually broke into Birkenau. He's the only person that ever did it. Now, you may hear reports that a British soldier broke into Birkenau, which he did. But this guy was already a prisoner, so he was losing nothing. He just went from one prison to another. This man was a free man, and he was going into Birkenau. He spent time in there, and he was documenting everything he saw and heard. Who was doing, what were they doing, how many were doing it, the whole 9 yards. Then he broke out again, and he got back to the underground people, and they sent this again back to London and said, these are the facts. This is what's going on. You better believe it. And they did. This was when the Allies began to start realizing what were going on in these camps. Now, the problem the Allies have always had with this story is these camps are in Poland. To send planes there to bomb it, you would risk throwing away a load of your resources, because they'd have to go over Germany. So the Allies thought the best thing we can do is get across Europe real quick, and get to these camps. Unfortunately, it was the Russians that liberated most of them. But he survived the war. He took part in the Warsaw Uprising and he survived that. These are his booking photographs at Auschwitz. And then, as so often happens when we talk about the Soviet occupation, because Poland was occupied by the Soviets after World War II, the Russian secret police thought he was an Allied spy. Now, they had no evidence for that, but why should that stop you? So he was put on trial, he was found guilty, and he was executed. We suspect his body is lying in a rubbish dump somewhere around Warsaw, because that was the favourite dumping ground of the Soviet secret police. That's Vito Paleski. This is Janusz Korczak. His real name is Dr. Henrik Goldschmidt. He was a Jewish educator. It was always his ambition to establish an orphanage for Jewish children, which he did. He was running this orphanage in Poland, and then one day the Nazis arrived. And as they established the Warsaw Ghetto, they came and told Janusz, you have to move your orphanage into the ghetto because you can't have Jews outside here. Which he did. They found a building and he got his orphanage running again. Then one day there's a knock on the door. Somebody opens the door and there's a German army officer standing there with a load of armed guards. And he explains to the person answering the door that they've come for the children. Well, by now, the children have a pretty good idea what's going on, and panic sets in. They're screaming, they're crying, they're running around trying to hide. It's just mayhem. Janusz comes to the door and they tell Janusz what they want. And he said, look, my children are very upset. Could you come back tomorrow? And everybody, you don't say that to an SS officer. And surprisingly, he said, certainly, I'll come back tomorrow. So Janusz and the staff were able to placate the children. And the next day they got them up, they washed them, they put the best clothes on, which is a relative term, but these were the better clothes that these children had. They had breakfast, and then the Germans came for them. Now, because of the way that the ghetto was, they couldn't get the trucks right up to the orphanage doorway. So Janusz had to lead the children through the ghetto to where these trucks were. And as he walked along, he was holding a child in his hands. He had 200 children behind him, and they were singing songs and skipping and dancing. And they took them to Treblinka. And on August 5th, 1942, Janusz Korczak walked into the gas chamber at Treblinka with 200 children and died with them. As they were going through the ghetto, the army officers were saying, you don't have to stay with these kids. It's the kids we want. You go. You just go and get on with your life. He said, these are my children. Where they go, I go. And he died with them. If Joe and Chris, when they were in Poland, they said, you go around Poland today, you see statues of Janusz with children alongside him. And if you go to Yad Vashem, this is his memorial there. It's in the Warsaw Square section. And here we have a different type of person. He's obviously not European. No, he's Japanese. His name's Senpo Sugihara. He was a Japanese diplomat, and he was being sent to the Japanese embassy at Kaunas in Lithuania. And before he left, he was told by his government that, there's a lot of things going on over there. Don't you get involved with them. You just worry about the stuff that's on your desk and you'll do fine. So he goes to the Japanese embassy in Kaunas. He's working away. And one day he has to go to the store. He goes into the store and there's a little boy at the counter, and as he's standing there waiting, this little boy is buying a load of sweets or candy. And the kid realizes, the shopkeeper tells him, you don't have enough money, son. So he says, I can't get on it. So Senpo gives him the difference. And as they're leaving the shop, they get into a conversation. And this little boy begins to tell Sempo what's really going on, because this little boy is Jewish. This troubles Sempo greatly, and he goes home and he's talking to his wife, and they're saying, well, what can we do to help? What could we possibly do? So they decide to start forging exit visas. So every night when he goes home from work, him and his wife would sit in the kitchen and forge exit visas. And it's estimated that by the time he'd finished, they'd got 10,000 Jews out of Lithuania. He was discovered. The Nazis found out what he was up to, and for some reason, they didn't kill him. I guess it's not cricket to murder the diplomats of your allies, you know. He was sent back to Japan, who sent him to Manchuria, because at this time, while Manchuria is in China, Japan was occupying it. He was stripped of all his credentials. I mean, this guy was just right down the bottom of the ladder now. You know, nobody'd have anything to do with him. He was a pariah. But he did survive the war. And if you go to Yad Vashem, you will find that man's name there. This is something I'm sure we're all familiar, the Talmud. And whoever saves a life, it is considered as if he saved an entire world. And I used to think about that a lot. I thought, how does that work? How does saving one person multiply? Well, here's the story. This photograph was taken in 1934 in Poland. The woman on the right is Franziska Sobkowa, or she's known as Frania. She's not Jewish, she's a Christian, but the two children that are with her are Jewish. They're the Beinstock children. The little girl in the middle is Paula Beinstock. The little boy is Ludwig Beinstock. And she's their nanny. Well, after the German invasion of Poland, the Poles were beginning to twig on what was going on. So Frania went to the parents and said, look, if you give me your children, I'll make sure the Nazis never get their hands on them. And this happened a lot during the war. You can just imagine you're a mother and somebody comes up and says, I'm going to take your kids away from you. Well, long story short, the mother ended up going with the kids. By this time, Ludwig's dead. Now, Ludwig didn't die because of anything the Nazis did. Ludwig was just a very sickly child who just couldn't hack it, okay? So the mother and Paula go with Frania to her apartment. Now, the father couldn't go. The father couldn't go because he smoked. And we'll talk about the why in a minute. Frania lived in an apartment. And for 2 years, the mother and the little girl lived under a bed. All they had was a pack of cards. That pack of cards today is in the Bremen. And they couldn't do anything, and that was the reason the father couldn't go, because he smoked, and smokers cough. Now, I'm sure you'll realise that your neighbourhoods have routines, whether it's something you think about or don't. A certain time of day the mail comes, a certain time so-and-so walks the dog, the school bus comes, so-and-so goes for a run, whatever. There's a routine. Well, Frania worked across the street in a house. This was the house of a senior SS officer. No pressure there. And at the end of the day, she would go into the kitchen and scrape together crumbs to take back for the child and the mother. They couldn't go near the window because people in the apartment knew Frania would be at work at 10 o'clock in the morning, and if anybody saw the drapes moving at the window, they go, oh, there's somebody in there. And they would turn people in a heartbeat. Why would we do that? They do that. The Nazis worked on a system of collective guilt. The way collective guilt works is if I say to you all now, nobody can have a drink of water. If I catch one of you drinking water, I'm going to shoot all of you. So this lady's watching that gentleman, make sure he doesn't have a drink of water. She don't want to die because he's thirsty. And you're watching that lady. Everybody's watching everybody else. And they'll turn you in a heartbeat. They survived the war. The husband survived the war. He went through a few labour camps, but he did survive. So Paula and her parents survived the war, as did Franja. The Beinstocks and Paula moved to Israel. And as Paula grows up, she goes to Hebrew University in Israel, in Jerusalem, and she graduates. And I don't know what her degree was, but this woman was a medical whiz kid. So it was something to do with biology or pharmaceutical work, something. This is her collecting her degree. And if you look at the lower left-hand corner of the photograph, you'll see the face of David Ben-Gurion, the first Prime Minister of Israel. So there she is. She's got her education. She got a doctorate, master's degree. This woman has qualifications out of sight. And she meets this man, Sam Arbeiser. Sam is a very successful businessman. Sam used to fight for the Irgun, the Jewish resistance group who were fighting the Brits in Palestine. But now that the war's over, he is a very successful businessman. They get married, they buy a house, and they think, this is it. We have a comfortable life. Sam's got a good business going. You know, we can forget about the past and just enjoy life. And then, as usually happens, your plans don't quite go like you think they're going to, because a letter arrives from a friend of theirs in Atlanta. This friend of theirs has a business he's trying to get off the ground, and he wants Sam's help. But it means they have to move to Atlanta. Long story short, they do. Now, they have never forgotten what Franja did for them. And so they contacted Franja in Poland and they explained the situation. We're living in Atlanta. We feel we owe you a debt. We'd like you to come over here. We will buy you a house, an apartment, whatever it is you want to live in. We will furnish it and we'll give you a stipend for the rest of your life. You will never ever have to worry about money. This is our way of thanking you. So Franja moves to Atlanta. Now, Franja couldn't hack it. I don't know why, whether it was the weather, she just missed Poland, whatever the reason was, she couldn't hack it. She wanted to go back to Poland. So the Arbeiter said, okay, you can go back to Poland, but the same conditions apply. We will buy you accommodation, we'll furnish it, and you will get a stipend. And they did this. This is Franja in later life. She died on February 15th, 1977. Now let's go back to the Saving One Life. When they got to Atlanta, Paula applied to the CDC for a job, but she got turned down for the same reason that I would, that my English is atrocious. And that was the reason they wouldn't employ her. So she went to Emory University. And she worked in some medical department, vaccines, treatments, everything. She was coming out with vaccines like nobody's business. She worked there for 25 years. And it's estimated that today there are around about 1 million people alive because of the work that Paula Arbeiser did on vaccines. That number's only going to grow because those 1 million people are having babies. So eventually the world will come from this. So if Franja hadn't decided to save a little girl's life, there's 1 million people who wouldn't be alive today. Franja Sobkova. This is a woman in a different situation. She's a Hungarian Jew. Her name is Rosa Rabota. She arrived at Auschwitz with her family. She was sent to slave labour. Her family was sent to the gas chamber. She and 3 other women were sent to work in some sort of armaments factory. They were working with gunpowder. And at the end of every 16-hour shift, they would smuggle small amounts of gunpowder out. And when they got back to the barracks, the dorm, whatever, they'd collect it, a bucket, a box, a drawer, whatever. Well, after a period of time, they had a sizable chunk of gunpowder. Remember the men in the striped uniforms, the Zona Commando? The ones that were operating crematorium number 4, Rosa and her friends gave them the gunpowder and they blew the crematoria up. What this did, the Nazis never had time to get this thing going again. They had no time to rebuild it. So it slowed the killing rate down because they were backed up with bodies. Well, the Nazis found out what were going on. And this is probably the only place you will see these 4 names. These are the 4 women that helped to blow up the crematoria. Now, 2 of the women, not Rosa, but two of the other 3 women, the Nazis executed straight away. Rosa and another one, they tortured for 2 months and then they executed her. So these are people who were rescuing, but they're all in different situations. This woman's name is Masha Bruskina, and this photograph was taken in Minsk in Belarus, a country that's in the news lately. This is October 26, 1941. Her and the 2 men, or the men either side of her, are partisans. She's been caught smuggling forged documents to Soviet prisoners of war, and she's being taken to her, well, the 3 of them are being taken to their place of execution. Something you have to remember about the partisans operating in this part of the world, you could be forgiven for thinking, well, the only people who were fighting were the Germans. That's not true. A lot of these countries are very anti-Semitic. So as well as fighting the Germans, these people were fighting their own countrymen, because their own countrymen would kill them if they had the opportunity. Like I said, these people just can't get a break. The sign around the neck says that she is a partisan and an enemy of the state. This one may surprise you. In Germany during the war were several resistance groups. Not all the Germans were for the Nazis. This is the White Rose group. This is a group of people at University of Munich. They were headed up by a professor. The woman in the middle is Sophie Scholl. The man on the left is her brother, Hans, and the man on the right is their good friend, Christoph Probst. And they formed the White Rose. Now, there were about another 9 or 10 people in this unit. It wasn't just the 3 of them. And what they used to do, they would publish leaflets because they were very much aware that what the Nazis were telling people just wasn't true. The Nazis were not winning the war. You know, the war wasn't going at all like the Nazis would have you believe. So they would publish the White Rose. It's called the White Rose because the banner on the top was a white rose. There was another group called the Red Symphony Orchestra, another resistance group. But this White Rose leaflet would tell the reader exactly what was going on. And there was also a how-to section. How to sabotage military equipment, how to sabotage manufacturing facilities, how to trip an army up. Basically anything to do to hamper the German army. Well, one particular day they're in a theatre handing out leaflets, and they're up on the 2nd floor in a balcony, and they're about to leave and go back to the dormitory, but they have leaflets left. So somebody says, what's the point of coming out here and then taking half the leaflets back? We just waste our time. Why don't you just throw them out and let people pick them up? Oh, okay. So he threw them out. Unfortunately, the janitor saw them. He turned them in. They were put on trial, executed out of hand. But there's an interesting tale at the end of this story. One of these leaflets, I think it was leaflet number 4 or number 5, made its way back to England. And the Allies read it and they said, this is really interesting stuff. The German people need to be able to read this. So they printed millions of copies of this leaflet. And when the German bombers took off from England to go and bomb Germany, they took hundreds of thousands of the leaflets with them. After they dropped the bombs, they dropped the leaflets. And if you go to Munich University today, outside you will see this memorial to them. These are copies of the leaflets, but they're in a weather-resistant form. They're either etched metal or something. But that's the memorial. They've even got streets named after them. This woman's pretty incredible. Irina Zendler. She's a Catholic, she's Polish. She was born in Opwok, Poland, which is a town Joe and Chris know very well. Her father was a doctor, and he would treat the Jewish people that the regular doctors refused to treat. And he was eventually treating a typhus outbreak. He got typhus and he died. So Irina picked up the slack and went to help. And the Jewish people were so appreciative, they actually put her through university. When the Warsaw Ghetto was up and running, she would go into the ghetto to treat people. Very surreptitiously, but she did it. And she would see the children in there, and she was very concerned about them. So she would ask the mothers, could I take your children? And I'll take care of them, and when the war's over, you can be reunited. So when she went into the ghetto, she always made sure she was wearing long skirts, and the children would come out under her skirt. And when she got home, she would write details of the child. What date, the name, the parents, anything that would help to identify this child's family. Because it was always her intention that these children would be reunited. And when she'd written it down on a piece of paper, she'd fold it up, pour it in a glass jar or a tin can, and she'd bury it in a backyard under an apple tree. And after the war, they actually dug up her backyard and found all this stuff. She eventually got caught. The Nazis took her in, they tortured her, they broke her arms and legs, and they were going to execute her. And the underground managed to bribe a guard to turn the other way while they got her out of the jail or the prison. So they got her out, and then they hid her for the rest of the war. Well, she survived the war, but as we've already learned, the Soviets are occupying Poland. She came to the attention of the Soviet secret police. They thought she was a collaborator. She collaborated with the Nazis. They never bothered to get evidence or to disprove that. They just went with it. They pulled her children out of university. She was ostracized. She was a social pariah. She finished the war absolutely destitute towards the end of her life because of this mistaken belief that she was a collaborator. And this is one of her quotes. Every child saved with my help and the help of all the wonderful secret messengers who today are no longer living is the justification of my existence on this earth and not a title to glory. What a humble woman. And this was her in later life. This was the big threat to the Nazis. She never saw herself as a hero. It's reckoned she rescued roughly 2,500 children, and she died May the 12th, 2008, at the age of 98. The next group, the final group, the group you never want to be in, the bystanders, those who saw what was being done or knew of it and did nothing. And remember I said earlier, when nobody challenged Hitler or the Nazis, they felt they were doing the right thing. Well, these people certainly helped them. This is in Baden-Baden, Germany. These men are being led away. You see the Star of David at the front, so it's quite obvious who they are. They have an armed escort, SS men. And then you look at the right, the bystanders. To them, this is amusement. This is entertainment. Did any of them say to these SS people, where are you taking these people? What have they done? What are you going to do to them? Have they had a trial? No. Oh, good, they're getting rid of the Jews. That's fine. Here's another one. There are probably more armed guards here than there are people they're escorting out of town. But you look on the left-hand side. There's the bystanders. If you look on the right-hand side, you see a couple on top of the wall. There's a woman with a black dress on standing up. The man by the side filming this. I suppose they would have some interesting conversation. Let me show you my holiday films. I've got film of people being led away. But these are the bystanders. These are the spineless wonders. This is Paris, France. These are Jewish men being loaded onto a transport, and they're going to Drancy, and they will eventually end up in a camp. You can see the Germans there, but look, the French police are helping them. And this is the Nuremberg defense. I was only doing what I was told. But more bystanders. It makes you wonder what would have happened if there was fewer bystanders and more people had complained. This is 1938 Vienna, after the Anschluss. It was always Hitler's dream that Germany and Austria would become one country. Wish they did. And here you see on their hands and knees a group of Jews who are being made to scrub the street. They're using harsh chemicals, acids, lye, anything that'll work. You may also notice they have no protective clothing, no gloves, no goggles, nothing. And then look who's looking, the bystanders. And if you can see it, there's people standing there with a smile on the face. These are the people who think, well, I know this is wrong, but there's a whole load of people looking at this, so it won't matter if I look. That's how their minds work. They don't realize that the mere presence of them is saying to these people with the swastikas on their sleeves, this is okay. And that one there, how very true that is. The unspeakable crime of the 20th century, more than the triumph of evil, was the sin of the innocent bystander. And to try and finish on a slightly upbeat note, next week on Yom Hashoah, we see the March of the Living. Jews from Israel and all over the world gather at Auschwitz-Birkenau, and they will walk to Auschwitz I. Now, you can do this in two sections. You can go to Poland and just do the walk, but what a lot of them do is then they go on to Israel, where they have more observances. And this is a prayer. They're saying prayers as they gathered at Auschwitz I. And this is my favourite photograph. This is two young Jewish boys standing on the ramp at Birkenau. They're facing the trees where the gas chambers were. And obviously, they're carrying the flag of the State of Israel. And if I had to put a title to this, I'd call it, We're Still Here. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. And what would I like you to take from this? I'm sure you've got your own points of view and your own feelings about it. One of the things we should remember, if somebody says they're going to do something, believe them. In 1926, Adolf Hitler gave a speech and he detailed exactly what he was going to do with the Jews. And 7 years later, he started to do it and the world slept. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. That was an incredible presentation. And it was just so much to take home and think about. So I hope that we can stay involved, stay informed, and hopefully have you back again and come and give another presentation, maybe next year or sometime down the road. Well, thank you very much for coming. That concludes our service for today, and feel free to hang out. You know, we still have some food left. Please don't run off without helping us clean up. We need lots of help in that regard as well. Okay, everyone.